Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Kennedy. I am the chairman of the Fort Worth Astronomical Society Astrophotography Special Interest Group, and this is our monthly meeting for September 2025. And tonight we have the privilege of having Linda from Linda Thomas-Fowler from Linda's Astronomy Adventures is her webpage, and I've been following her for approximately 4 or 5 years. And she also has an Astrobin account. She is a software programmer and is one of the unique personality profiles who has both the ability to do fantastic data collection as well as data processing, as you will see if you take a look at any of her published images on her webpage or on Astrobin. She has a number of Astrobin achievements and also is just very knowledgeable on data collection in addition to data processing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and I'll hand the meeting over to Linda. Go ahead.
Thanks, Stephen. And I want to meet this person you're talking about. Um, so we've got a relatively small group here, so I'd like to be as interactive as we can be. So if you have questions, I don't know whether you want to be a gatekeeper, Stephen, or have people jump in to ask them, but whatever works for you guys is fine with me.
Sure. For now, let's go ahead and put the questions in the chat if you have something, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and then I might jump in. That way we don't talk on top of one another.
Sounds great. So the thing I have this thing talking about read noise and gain and offset, but really that's not what the goal of my thing is. It was kind of where I started, but then I realized that what we're really talking about is we've got a bunch of parameters as astrophotographers that we can adjust, and we want to adjust them to maximize something in our image, and that something might be image quality, that something might be getting the faintest signal we can at the expense of maybe some other things. So what I'm really going to be talking about is what we can do with these parameters to try to get the most out of our images. So I am definitely not an expert. I am an amateur astronomer. I've been doing imaging for, well, going on 6 years now, and I'm a member of the Northern Virginia Astronomy Club, and I live now in the Shenandoah Valley, and our whole club is probably about the size of your meeting here, so it's a small group. So the problem that we're looking at is we've got all these parameters that we can adjust. We've got gain, we've got offset, we've got temperature, we've got exposure time, and how can we adjust those to get what we want? And it turns out there's no one answer to that question because it really depends on what aspect of image quality we want to maximize. So that we might be trying to get the lowest possible noise, we might be trying to get the faintest possible signal, and those can be conflicting goals. So we can't always get everything. It's for anybody who's an engineer, it's choosing the compromise that gets you where you want to go, right? So one of the things we have to deal with are our noise sources, and these aren't all of them, but these are the ones that we commonly deal with, where we've got read noise, dark current, shot noise, and quantization noise. And some of these things, like quantization noise, we don't even normally talk about very much. And then there's a whole terminology thing. You'll hear people talk about ADU, and you'll hear people talk about DN, and they're often used interchangeably. But if we're going to be pedantic, they're not really the same thing, although for practical purposes they are, where ADU is the raw values that come from the analog to digital converter, whereas digital number is just a general term that talks about a pixel's value, and that value might be manipulated in some way, processed in some way. So although we usually use that interchangeably, there'll be a couple times, at least once in the presentation, where the distinction actually matters. So read noise is something we talk about a lot as imagers. And when we read out from a sensor, there's noise that comes in along with the signal. And that noise is pretty consistent from shot to shot, and it's inherent to the electronics. And it varies with gain, but not with temperature. And we talk about that noise being measured in electrons, but in practical purposes, we see it as additional ADU. Excuse me. And one of the things you'll hear people talking about is you need to expose long enough to swamp the read noise or to bury the read noise. So we'll talk a little bit about that more later. You hear people talk about adjusting gain, and gain in its purest form is analog amplification that's applied when we read out the sensor. So it's operating entirely in the analog domain and not in the digital domain. It happens before the signal's digitized. And the native units for gain are electrons per ADU. So if our gain is 1 electron per ADU, then every time the analog to digital converter produces an electron, we get 1 ADU of output. If our gain is 5 electrons per ADU, then we need 5 electrons before we get 1 ADU. And if we only get 4 electrons, we don't get any. So at the ADU level, this is kind of the quantization effect. So people who are using digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras don't think in terms of gain, they think in terms of ISO. And ISO and gain are the same thing, but with different labels, of course. And even within astrophotography, different manufacturers, even different cameras within a single manufacturer, they don't use the same gain scales. Whereas at least in DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, ISO is a uniform scale across all the different brands. The problem is we need to know what gain really means, and digital terrestrial cameras don't tell us that. They just tell us it's ISO 100, ISO 200, and they don't really tell us things like the read noise associated with that gain. The good thing is, or how much dynamic range is associated with that ISO value. There's a great website called photonstophotos.net that actually gives us a lot of that information for maybe not all, but most digital cameras. The good thing is that for at least a lot of modern cameras, you only need to worry about 2 ISO values, and that's generally 100 and 800. We'll get to a little bit about why that is in a bit. And then in addition to gain, you hear people talking about offset. And this was something that really confused me when I was starting out. And because there was some people talked about offset, some people talked about pedestal, and then there were other things that were talked about offset, and it confused me as to the context of what they were talking about. So in our purposes here, offset is a fixed number of ADU that's added to the signal before or as it's read out from the camera. And it serves one simple purpose, and that's to ensure that the noise sources are completely captured in the signal that you're getting. If our offset is too low, then we actually get a bad noise profile, and it makes it harder for us to calibrate our data well. One of the other things that we talk about, and this isn't a parameter that we have direct control over, but it's one that affects the quality of our images a lot, is full well depth. And so every pixel has this well that accumulates electrons. And that full well depth is the number of electrons that can be captured before it fills up. And if it fills up, then we can't accumulate any more signal. And so let's say we had a well that could hold 255 electrons. And at that 256th electron, we would stop counting because we wouldn't have any place to put it. So one of the things that happens is the lower your gain, the larger your full well is, and the higher your gain, the smaller your full well depth is. So there's a trade-off there. And so your first reaction would be, well, I want the lowest possible gain because that's going to give me the largest possible well, which will give me the most dynamic range. I can capture the faintest and the brightest, the largest span between the faintest and the brightest signals. Now, the noise sources that we deal with are mostly Gaussian sources. They might have an average level value. So people might say your average read noise is 3 electrons, but it's not fixed at 3 electrons. Some of the noise, sometimes it'll be a little higher and sometimes it'll be a little lower. And on this graph, this kind of shows you a nominal zero line for what that noise is, but it's not zero. It's just kind of the nominal point at which sometimes they're higher and sometimes they're lower. And so let's say that nominal value was 6 electrons. And so let's say your gain was, or your offset was 5. So you'd kind of expect and let's say you were doing a bias frame, you'd expect your average signal level to be that 5 plus 6 or 11 electrons, whatever that translates into ADU for your particular gain setting. But it won't be. Some will be a little bit higher than 11. Some will be a little bit lower than 11. Most of them will be right about 11. But some of them might be quite a bit lower. And if they're too low, then that pixel clips down to 0 and we've lost that bit of noise. And your first reaction might be, well, good, I've lost noise. That's good. I don't have it anymore. But now we can't subtract it properly because we don't have what it is. So when we subtract the noise, we're going to overcorrect and actually remove some signal. So it's important that your offset be high enough that that those negative values of noise from the nominal value get completely captured. So if you're using a CCD camera and even some CMOS cameras like the Moravian cameras, you don't worry about offset. The manufacturer has done the work to figure out what the best offset is. And they make your life easy. You can't even set the offset. It just happens under the covers. But most CMOS cameras give us control over the offset. And I actually think that's not necessarily a good idea, but that's the way the world is. Um, and so everybody, when they first start, I know I did, is like, well, what should it be? Because if you set it too high, you're giving up dynamic range for no reason. But if you set it too low, then you're actually hurting your image quality. And so you can either use the manufacturer's recommendation, like I think most ZWO cameras have a default of 50, I think. Um, but there is a process that you can go through to figure that out. Let me back up there a second. And it's not, there's 2 ways to do this. One is to take some bias frames with the offset that you have, and then look at the statistics for that frame. If any pixels are 0, then your offset's too low. If all of your pixels are above 0, and you've done this for 10 or 20 frames, and your statistics say that you don't have any zeros, then your offset's probably fine. Now, if your lowest pixel value is up at 500 maybe, then you probably can lower your offset some. Um, it's a concept that I know for me was very confusing in the beginning, but the actual procedure to figure it out isn't too bad. You'll hear people say, look at your histogram and make sure there's a little bit of separation from the left. And that's kind of a good rule of thumb, but it doesn't give you the complete picture because it doesn't show the level of detail to see if you actually have 0 pixels. And that's what you really care about. And wow, that picture went off the screen. So one of the things that we deal with all of these cameras, especially with the Astro cameras, is the um, the specs that we see. And so we've got things like full well and gain and dynamic range and read noise are the big four that most manufacturers show us. And you can see, well, you can't really see well in this graph because my screen is blocking it, but full well pretty much decreases linearly with gain, at least on most cameras. And the way that they measure gain, at the bottom, they're measuring it in their kind of unitless numbers. This is a ZWO graph. I think for the IMX 455 family of sensors. So, ZWO gives you this abstract number that goes from 0 to 450, but the native units, the underlying units, are electrons per ADU. And so at gain 0, you've got a number that's just under zero point 0.8, whereas at gain, let's say 420, 400, our read noise is almost 0. And so we know that lower the read noise, the better. So your first thought might be, well, I should throw my read noise, my gain all the way up to the maximum. And certainly that will give you the lowest possible read noise, but it also really destroys your full well depth. And if you care about dynamic range, you've thrown away almost 6 stops of dynamic range by doing that. And so if all you care about are the faintest details in an object, that might make sense. But if you don't want to blow out stars, that doesn't make sense. And so it becomes important to look at these graphs relative to what you want to do. So for most people, if you want a narrow band gain and a broadband gain, well, at broadband, it may make sense to go with gain 0 because you get the most full well, you get the most dynamic range. And in most people's cases, their skies are bright enough that they're going to easily bury that read noise, that higher read noise. And even on a camera like this, where your read noise is so low, even at gain 0, it's not that much of a big deal. If you were using an older CMOS or CCD camera where the read noise might be 9 electrons, then that becomes a much bigger deal. And we'll see why in a bit. Gain 100, if you're doing narrowband, gives you kind of the best compromise between full well depth, dynamic range, and read noise. And that's because of this discontinuity you can see down in the read noise graph, where the read noise goes from a little bit above 3, like 3.3 electrons, all the way down to 1.4 electrons roughly. There's that big discontinuity, and that's because in the physical hardware, there's 2 different gain stages. So we're using different electronics when we go to that gain value. So we can make that sacrifice. So a lot of people just use gain 100 and say, hey, that's fine for me. I don't really want to deal with having to take 2 different sets of darks, 2 different sets of flats. I just want to deal with one thing. And if that's the case, gain 100 might be your sweet spot. And because one of the things that we might want to maximize in addition to our image quality maybe is maximizing our fun. And for some people, keeping track of all of this stuff isn't a lot of fun. So finding one set of things that works for pretty much everything you do is not necessarily a wrong answer. So when we look at gain, um, these are the graphs that we turn to. So this is an older camera, the ASI 1600, that was very popular. And it doesn't have two gain stages. It just has a smoothly changing curve. Um, and it also doesn't have a very big dynamic well. Its its full well is, maybe a fifth, maybe a little bit more than a fifth of the IMX 455 sensor. And it's also only a 12-bit camera and not a 16-bit camera. And that has some pretty big consequences for us because at gain 0, we've only got 12 and a half stops of dynamic range compared to the other camera, which had 14. The weird thing about this camera, I think it's in another slide, but I'll talk about it here to at least set the stage, is that because it's a 12-bit camera and our read noise is up around 3.6, if we don't get 3.6 electrons, we don't get a pixel. So when you're dealing with faint signals, you can get this quantization noise showing its effects there really clearly, where you get these very clear gradations between pixel values. It looks like posterization. And so this is a camera where you may not want to use gain 0 ever because it the combination of 12 bits, 3.6 electrons, um, and the quantization noise just makes your faint stuff look kind of crappy. So a lot of people go up to around gain 76 on this camera, where you've sacrificed a little bit of full well depth, but you've brought your read noise down to a lower point, and so the quantization of noise isn't as obvious. And yeah, here's what I just talked about. So this is not as much of a big deal on a 16-bit sensor, but at 14-bit it becomes a bit more, and on 12-bit it becomes even more. But even at 16-bit, this is a thing. And the more you care about faint detail, the more it's going to bite you. So ultimately, this comes down to a balancing act. We want enough dynamic range that we can capture everything in our scene, but we also want to get the least noise we can in our scene. And those two parameters are diametrically opposed. If we want dynamic range, we have to give up read noise. We're going to have more. It's just the way digital sensors work. So we have to decide what we want to maximize or what we want to minimize. And if we think about those things, then at least we understand what compromises we're making, because everything's a compromise. So one of the things you see people talk about, and I know this just overwhelmed me when I started, is what is the optimum exposure level? Well, the truth is this is a misnomer. There is no optimum exposure level in terms of one that's just best because it's best. What this is an exposure level that lets you get the most out of stacking. Because when we stack, a single hour-long exposure is better than 61-minute exposures. Now, it's going to have the 61-minute exposures will have lower noise because of averaging the 60 subs, but they won't have quite as much detail as that 160-minute sub. But it gets pretty close. And this equation helps you figure out how to get that point. And this is where we talked about that swamping the read noise. So this SF is the swamp factor. It's just a number. The read noise, the RNs, is the read noise in electrons. The gain is your camera gain in electrons per ADU. The offset is your bias offset in ADU. And then the rightmost element is a normalization factor that kind of scales everything to make it comparable, whether it's 16-bit, 14-bit, 12-bit, or whatever. So most people, I didn't come up with this. I got this from Cloudy Nights back in 2019 from a guy named John Rista. And who knows where he got it from, but he was really smart and seemed to know what he's talking about. So I listened to what he was saying. Um, Most people say the swamp factor should be 10, but John was saying anywhere in the 3 to 10 range is probably good enough. Um, Now, the funny thing is, in broadband, that's pretty easy. Most of us have enough light pollution in our sky. Even if you're in a pretty dark sky, there's enough light pollution to do this without any trouble. But if you're doing narrowband, even if you're in a bright city, you may not be able to ever do this. It's impossible. You just don't get enough signal through the narrowband filter to do it. I live in Bortle 4-ish skies, and when I did the math, I needed something like a multi-hour exposure to make this work, and it's just not possible. So this is practical for broadband, but for narrowband, it's not. What I'm going to say next is don't worry about any of this. Well, okay, unless you're a crazy person like me that wants to get into the weeds of the math and understanding what's going on, and then join me in my craziness. But for the rest of you, you don't need to sweat this because this is what really matters. Um, Expose for as long as you can reliably track. If you're clipping too many stars, shorten your exposure. And that will work. It may not be, quote, optimal, but it will make your life simpler. So I'll give you a real world example. I'm part of a team that images on a plane wave scope in at SRO in California. And we earlier this year, the owner of the scope bought a Moravian CMOS camera. And we had been using an old CCD camera, one of these dinosaur cameras that had 9 electrons of read noise. And we just did everything that was bin one at 15 minutes. And actually, we even did our bin two, we did at 10 minutes, I think. Um, and we just kind of kept doing that when we transitioned to the CMOS camera. And that was fine for narrowband. But for broadband, we were clipping lots of stars. And so we ended up having, even at gain 0 on that camera. So we ended up having to shorten our exposures to 5 minutes. That effectively gave us 9 times as much dynamic range because we shortened the exposure to a third and we lowered our read noise by a third, or sorry, we increased our full well depth by 3 times. And so when we combine those together, we got 9 times as much dynamic range. And so we didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. We kind of looked at the graph and said, 1/3 here, shorten the exposure by a third, and we get 9 times as much. And we did an experiment. It's like, yeah, that works. So it's not something you need to really overthink. Get as much signal as you can and don't sweat it. If your mount will only track for a minute, do it for a minute. If your mount can track for 15 minutes, do it for 15 minutes. There's one caveat there. The more light polluted your skies are, the less value there is in going longer. Um, there's something we haven't talked about, which is temperature. So read noise, gain, quantization noise, none of that stuff is dependent on temperature, but dark current is. Um, and it turns out that if you haven't seen this video by Robin Glover, and I can send this to Stephen, excuse me, so he can send it out to you directly. He's got a great video from a few years ago that talks about the relatively small value that you get from cooling too much in light pollution. Um, and so And with these modern CMOS cameras, their read noise is relatively low. So you don't need to go down to minus 25 like you did on a CCD because there's no real value to it. It makes your life a lot more complicated. So going down to 0 to -5, getting comfortably below your ambient temperature in the winter is all you really need to do. And then binning. So in the CCD world, binning started because you could actually increase your or shorten the time you needed to spend on target to get the same result. And that's because on a CMOS or on a CCD camera, a bin 2 pixel has 4 times the full well depth. So you got a lot more dynamic range at bin 2. You sacrifice resolution, but you got a lot more dynamic range. But that doesn't happen that way on a CMOS camera. When you do a bin 2 image on CMOS, you're just averaging pixels together. You don't get one super pixel with 4 times the full well. So most people today probably don't do bin 2 on a CMOS camera. Um, Many people don't do L at all on a CMOS camera. And there's a lot of debate about this. I had an opinion that I thought the math worked out for, but when I did some real world testing, it disagreed with my math. So I'm still doing L, but I'd like to ditch it, but just because it makes life simpler. Um, but on paper, in my brain, it doesn't seem like L should really matter for a CMOS camera. But on paper and practice seem to disagree. So I'm doing something wrong somewhere. I'd still recommend doing luminance, but I wouldn't recommend doing bin 2. There's no real advantage. There's a tiny bit of advantage, but not as much as there is on a CCD camera. So these are places you can find me on the net. Stephen mentioned my Astrobin. If you my Astrobin ID is my ham radio call sign AC4LT. You can also find me at lindasastronomyadventures.space, which can also get you to the Astrobin. And then I do a non-astronomy thing called the Spectrum Podcast, which you can find at spectrumpodcast.org. But with that, let me uh, stop sharing and we can start talking because I've probably, hopefully, said some things that people are going to go, but, and we can talk about um, what makes sense in different situations. I know Stephen sent me something that said that most of the people in your group were using the ASIA 2600, um, either the MM or the MC. And so a lot of what I was talking about with the IMX 455, that's just the APS-C version of that. So it's the same parameters.
Well,
So
excellent. I know we've got a number of people with questions, and the first one is Chris. Go ahead, Chris. I know you've got a number of questions. Go ahead.
So how does your formula, the formula that's like 3 slides back, relate to Robin Glover's formula?
um,
Now his formula is focused on signal to noise ratio and
ye-
ignores other factors.
yeah, so I did not make this formula, so I'm not sure
Ah,
what
but it looks very
the
similar.
motivation. But
Yeah,
I think they come from the same roots.
yeah, I
Um,
think they do.
I think they're just expressing it in a different way because Robin's talking about he's looking at it from the point of view, if I'm remembering correctly, of incoming signal.
Right.
And he's looking at it in terms of that. And the problem with Robin's formula is that's a number that most of us don't know. We
Yeah.
really don't know what our incoming signal flux is in terms of photons. And John Riesta's formula was kind of a practical application of that. That was kind of a, uh, a heuristic to be able to get you in the right ballpark.
Yeah, in Robin's formula, there's no assumption about how bright the target is you're looking at, but he does work out the background noise, so at least you
Right.
can calculate that.
Yeah. And you can actually get to what he's talking about if you do some broadband and narrowband, not on a target, just pointing at a random patch of sky, um, and just do some exposures and look at your noise. And in a broadband, if you're exposing enough that you don't readily see the noise in a sub, you're probably good. In narrowband, except maybe not in O3 if you're in really light polluted skies, but for HA and S2, you probably can't expose long enough to really stop seeing the noise, unless you got a super bright target that's filling the frame.
Right. Yeah, I do much longer exposures for narrowband. And more recently, I've turned my gain back up to 100. Or no,
Yeah.
it's not 100, it's whatever it is. I'm using the IMX 455 too. So
Yeah, so it really does make sense to get your read noise as low as you practically can, but without giving up dynamic range. So that gain 100 probably makes sense for most people. The only person I would say it makes sense to go up higher and not all the way to maximum, but to maybe get your read noise down to where the curve really flattens out is if you're going after a really, really, really faint target and that's all you care about in narrowband and you want to get that read noise as low as you can. But that's not most of us, at least not most of the time.
back to you, Stephen. I got 50 other questions, but I'll let somebody else ask a question.
Well, all right. I know that we had some questions from, was it Dan Hobson? Dan, did you indicate you had some questions?
I turned my mic on. I had one question or comment. I come at this from a background of electronics and electrical engineering and signal, and I specialized in signal processing. A couple of classes I had in my master's program was speech processing and image processing. So I have some image processing from a college standpoint, and I'll in my first job out of college was working at Seagate doing programming signal processors. And when I worked in serial, I noticed that when you bring your images in, it brings them from a 16-bit camera into a 32-bit image storage. And the one of the advantages of that I don't think a lot of people think about is one of the advantages of stacking a lot of shorter exposure images is that also will increase your dynamic range, because when you
Hmm.
as you take these 16-bit images and start adding them in, which is what stacking does, you're adding each time you double the number of frames, you actually increase a one stop or approximately one stop of dynamic range to your imaging.
That's a
So that
really good point, and I had forgotten about that. But yeah, you do get that advantage by stacking. Of course, you got some disadvantages by stacking lots and lots of frames, especially on an IMX 455 where you got 60 megabytes a pop. But
yeah, right. Yeah, and so you don't want to take an old 20-year-old computer and try to do that. But
yeah.
I tend to stay up to date on my computers, and with my laptop, I have enough processor power that it might take, when I'm stacking, I typically stack I found that when I go out and I take a half-hour long exposure, and I typically go out for an hour at a time, because right now there's so many mosquitoes out there. Even walking back and forth, I just stay. I tend to what I found, one of the sources of noise you didn't talk about was satellite trails, and since Elon Musk got into the game of throwing up space junk. When you take if I take two two images of a half-hour exposure, I only get that basically that noise from those satellite trails gets cut in half, and so I found that taking a minimum of 10 exposures of anything is necessary to get rid of the satellite trails, and so I typically will. Uh, I've gotten now to where I typically don't take anything more than 60 seconds. I try to with my, I went out last night and took RGB and also took a dual band for my luminance, and that's something that people haven't. I did some little bit of searching online and found that another trick to get a good luminance is to use dual band filters for that, because it narrows down if you're looking to get luminance for your nebula.
Yeah,
Is
effectively becomes a light pollution filter for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and so I did that, and I took the same exposure, RGB and dual band, and I got good images just taking 30-second exposures and taking 120 images, and yeah, it takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes to stack those on my computer, but there's other things I can be doing. Once I started stacking. I can go off and do something else while it's working on it.
Yeah, and it's a really good point because you do increase your dynamic range the more subs you have. But like with everything else, it's a trade-off. You're trading off one
Right.
parameter for another.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
the story of my career right there.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
it's engineering
so
101.
you get more dynamic range, but you're sacrificing some stacking efficiency compared to a longer exposure. And so, um, you might be making it up in volume, but you're adding more complexity to your life. So it's up to each person to figure out what their trade-offs are. I know like
Yeah.
when we do images in California, we tend to do I'd say typically 24 to 48 hours of time on an image. So we end up with a fair number of subs per image. Um, but if we did that at 1 minute subs, we would fill up everybody's hard drive every night.
Yeah.
All right, Bill Garver is next. Bill, are you having an issue unmuting?
No, I can unmute.
Okay,
I
there you
think.
go. All right.
Got it? I just wondered if I needed to do anything else. Uh, okay, so my questions are, actually, you answered one long-standing question because I've always wondered whether, say, 3 electrons of read noise is really one standard deviation equals 3 electrons, or if it's like almost a fixed value, and you answered that question. But now I noticed that all the exposure recommendations, and I remember John Reese's formula too, because I got in the weeds on this for myself, probably like you. So I'm a fellow nerd, and I wrote 40 pages of typed notes on all the formulas and stuff. But I was always wondering why the recommendations seem to focus on read noise when for my typical exposures, I'm in like Bortle 8. And so, I'm taking narrow bands of 900 seconds, and which is nowhere near what the formula recommends. But anyway, 15 minutes is enough. But my shot noise and my thermal noise are more electrons than my read noise. I have like 9, even though it's a low number, 0.002 or something, multiply by 900 seconds, and suddenly you've got 9 electrons of thermal noise. And the shot noise is even more. And so I know, in line with the recent discussion on stacking, as you lengthen the exposure, you get proportionally that much more signal, but your shot noise, for example, is more like the square root of what you lengthened it, so on. So you've gained signal to noise.
Right.
So, but my question is, it's still noise. why are you not trying to swamp that noise? Why only read noise? And a corollary is when you were talking about offset and you said, you figure the gain, you figure the um, read noise and so on, you need an offset that's a few standard deviations. I mean, you want to capture at least say 3 or 4 standard deviations of noise.
Exactly.
That's just read noise, and that's a number like 3. But if I really have 20 electrons of noise, how big does my offset need to be?
Well,
Just
so let's take that in two parts.
yeah, it is a two-part question.
Um, so your first question was, um, why don't we take these other sources of noise into account in that equation?
Yeah,
And I think the answer to that is that those sources of noise are somewhat independent of the exposure itself, right? So your dark current's going to go up the longer you expose. That's going to go up linearly with time.
right.
Your shot noise is going to decrease well, I
Your
mean,
noise increases too. Shot noise increases
right,
along
but
with
it
exposure.
increases at the square root, so it increases
Yeah,
less quickly.
yeah.
I was getting tongue-tied trying to say that. Um, but uh, but we don't know what the shot noise is, right? We don't know the value for that.
Right. And it probably depends on your background, how much light pollution you have, because you're
Yeah.
accumulating all those electrons too.
Now we do know the dark current, and as I was putting this together, I was thinking about that aspect of this equation. It's like, why don't we tell people to account for dark noise in the offset? And it seems to me like we should. Um,
But
but
is the
nobody
answer
talks about it.
perhaps that it's just directly proportional to your exposure, and so it just stays at a same relative value?
I think part of it is that on a lot of these modern cameras, if you're cooling down to 0 or -5, the read noise is so low. If you look at that in electrons per pixel per second, it's
Yeah.
so low that even at a 600-second exposure, it might only be 1 electron.
Oh,
Um,
well, my old 1600 camera, I worked out all those numbers and I was getting like 9 electrons.
yeah, so the
Maybe my
1600's
2600
definitely
is
got higher
better.
read noise or higher
Yeah.
dark current noise, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think if in a camera like that, you do need to account for that in your offset as well. Um,
Okay.
or at least I would. I've never heard anybody talk about it, but I was thinking about that exact same thing and thinking, how come nobody says this? But and then I thought, well, in an IMX 455, uh, your read noise or dark current is pretty low once you're
Yeah.
cooled.
So would
Now,
you guess an offset of 50 is, if that's the recommendation, you guess that for most circumstances,
I
that
think
would work?
it's probably, I think ZWO has probably been conservative. And if I'm remembering correctly, ZWO says that 50 is not a value in ADU or DN. It's just a number, and then they pick
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
number that is appropriate for that. So how they scale that internally from camera to camera, I don't know. But
Okay.
it, but because they insulate us from that number, it makes our life more complicated.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And then um, for your second question, which I've
Well,
already
you
forgotten.
answered it kind of on the offset. That
Oh,
was the
okay.
second question. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I think I saw Jim Potts may have had a question. Jim? Nope. Okay, then back over to Chris.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk about bin two because I recently started shooting at bin two.
Bring it on.
I must say I like the result.
Hmm.
Uh, and I was thinking, well, okay, you've got 4 pixels instead of one, all capturing the same signal, right? So isn't that effectively going to speed up your capture? Isn't there that benefit to bin two?
But you don't have 4 pixels gathering the same signal. You have 4 pixels gathering their own signal and then being averaged together.
Right.
So
Okay.
um, you get the benefits of that averaging. That does bring down some noise, but it doesn't give you the dynamic range that a CCD bin 2 pixel would, where you have 4 times the full well depth.
Yeah. So really the only benefit is reducing the file size.
Yeah, you get a little bit of noise benefit. Um, so, but you don't get the same amount of noise benefit that you would get from a CCD camera.
Right.
So I'm not going to say it's that it's insignificant, but um, whether it's worth the extra complexity in your workflow is a question that you need to figure out
Well,
for you.
the main reason I started using Ben2 was only when I'm imaging at 2,350 millimeters of focal length
Mhm.
with an image scale of 0.33 arc seconds per pixel.
Oh, another crazy person doing that. All right, we got to talk.
Right, but it's sort of self-defeating. And I started imaging at that pixel resolution, that subframe resolution, and it was like, man, I'm not getting the result I'm looking for. And I realized that seeing is a much bigger factor than, I can get a higher and higher resolution, but if my seeing is, let's say average seeing on where I'm imaging is between 3 and 4 arc seconds, then having a pixel scale of 0.3 arc seconds per pixel, I'm not gaining anything.
Yeah, completely. I completely agree with you.
So
When we got the CMOS camera, our image scale went from like 0.72
yeah,
down to 0.3.
right,
And my assumption was, well, we're probably going to do everything bin 2 because there's no point at running at 0.3.
right.
But SRO claims to have, I mean, not every night, but they claim to be able to get sub-arc second seeing on some nights.
Oh, then you do want to image at
So
point.
so so we did the experiment. We did some imaging at bin 1, and then we did the software equivalent of binning where we downsampled it,
Right, right.
and then we put the images side by side and looked and did some pixel peeping, and it was like we actually can see a difference. I mean, it wasn't a huge night and day difference, but it was a noticeable difference. And uh my budget for hard drives went up.
Right. You need a lot more processing power
Yeah.
to handle all that. Well,
They're getting cheaper now.
Yeah.
in my defense, I did ask Adam Block, and he has this new scope that he just put some equipment out at what's
Down
it
in
called?
Chile, yeah.
In Chile, El Source,
Yeah.
like that. And he was imaging at bin 2. And I asked him, well, what's your yardstick? What are you measuring that makes you want to go to bin 2? And he basically said, yeah, you want your smallest detail star to have like 3 to 4 pixels across it. So that's his yardstick. And if he can get seeing good enough to go to bin 1, then he'll do it. But typically he's not getting that.
Yeah. And Adam Block's way smarter than me. I would listen to him over me, but he um it's definitely not a thing that you can just say, well, if I don't do the measurements, I know the answer. You've got to
Yeah,
look at it and see if it makes sense. Now we get much bigger stars because of that. Our stars are more like 8 to 10 pixels.
right,
And I'm not crazy about that just because it creates some problems for Blur Exterminator.
right.
But but um but in our case it's been more worthwhile than not.
Yeah, that's basically what Adam said. He said if you've got stars with, I mean, I was getting stars with 9. My smallest detail was 9 pixels wide. Then he said, yeah, you will end up with stars that look somewhat bloated, and I
Yeah.
think that's true. I mean, if you talk to Jim and is Jim on McCatherine? I don't see him on, but maybe he is. But when you're imaging with a C11 or a C14, you see a lot of images with really big stars, and they just look ugly. Uh,
Yeah.
and so you process them down and crunch them down, and they don't crunch down quite as nicely as this, the bin 2 or even bin 4. I know people that I've got a friend who images with a C14, and she's always using bin 4. No, you know, um,
Well, these days, I tend not to shrink stars as since I'm usually processing them separately. I just don't grow them as much to, stretch
right,
them separately from the image, and
right.
that ends up covering a multitude of sins.
Right.
Okay, let's see. We have, let's see who's up next. I think I had Glenn Fraser up next. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, on the ZWO gain or offset, uh, I've always found them to be overly cautious.
Yeah, I
My
agree.
2600 is sitting at 20 for an offset right now, and that is after about 200 bias frames and calculating my my pixels. And I've been very happy with that at a gain of 100, which is where that camera pretty much stays all the time.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you're just trusting the number that when I left it at 50, my lowest pixel anywhere in the frame was at 500.
Yeah,
And
and
that
that's
was
too
just
high.
wasting too much dynamic range. So I got it down to where my darkest pixels are right around 70 or so. So that gives me plenty of dynamic range, and I don't have to worry about going to zero with it. But the other thing I want to say is thank you for validating kind of what I have done. And basically, I took all those dark frames, calculated my number of hot pixels, and I shoot for exposures that don't give me more saturated pixels than I had hot pixels, than like 20%.
Hmm.
So if I had 200 hot pixels, I'd only go for like 240 saturated pixels, and then I would back my exposures down. And I'm constantly shooting between 5 and 10 minute exposures with that, and have had very good luck. So I think you're right. You just, don't concentrate on the formulas too much. Just shoot it and test it and do what looks good, because uh, I'm still rather new to astroastronomy, but I, I I ditched all of my computer science and my physics and trying to just enjoy the hobby instead of going back to college. So yeah, but thank you for that. Everything that you presented was very, very good. And I think Chris, on a CMOS, some of the figures I've seen is binning gives you maybe a 20% improvement on signal to noise compared to what binning used to do on a CCD. So it really doesn't accomplish much, but it does help you in other aspects.
Right.
But yeah,
Well,
that's
my M27 came out pretty good. I was
And
pleased with that.
and ultimately, that's what matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we most of us who do imaging tend to be more technically oriented, and it's easy for us to go into the weeds, trying to make things perfect. I used to have a boss that said, um, well, there were two ways of saying it. There was the nice way, which was don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough, which is the nice way. But the other way he said is it's time to shoot the engineer and ship the product, which made me a little uncomfortable. But he his point was that we can get really hung up on over optimizing things that don't actually make a lot of real practical difference. And um, I I think that things like exposure length and gain and offset are one of those things. And do one of those parameters that you need to worry about is what makes me happy. If you're the kind of person that loves getting into that stuff and figuring out what makes your system work, you know, to get every single photon's worth of detail out of it, then that's great. That's what makes you happy. But if that doesn't make you happy, don't worry about it. Do what makes you happy, because there are some defaults that will just, get you 90% of the way there.
I haven't changed any of the major settings of my routine for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And I feel much happier now than tweaking and playing with things every day and every night. Now I just have images that come in, and it's been, at first I thought it was fun going out and trying to get the last little bit of guiding accuracy or the last little bit of signal to noise, but now it's like just let it shoot and then play with the pictures and processing.
Yeah, do what makes you happy. And that's always the right answer.
Well, thank you.
What makes me happy? Nothing. I can't be happier than I've got a big spreadsheet with pivot tables.
We know that about you.
I do like to know why I'm doing stuff, but I think you're right. At the end, I've got, okay, when I know I can take 10 minute, I could probably take 20-minute exposures, but I take 5-minute exposures on narrowband. And then on broadband, I take even shorter because on broadband, I'm trying to get the stars mainly. And the biggest factor on getting good stars is your seeing. And so I go for shorter exposures to try and capture a decent seeing. Because if you go to long exposures on broadband, you just end up with this mass. Jim Potts, I think that's the reason why our collaborative effort on the antenna galaxy, we started that in the spring.
Right.
And we never completed it because we all had to go at imaging, processing it in PixInsight, and we just couldn't make the stars look nice. The stars just looked so ugly. And I think it's what, I looked at Linda, I looked at you had a video on the antenna, and I realized, only maximum it comes up to like 30 degrees on the horizon. So you're looking through a lot of atmosphere. And I think that's the principal reason why our stars look so crappy.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah. You're guaranteed to have worse. Whatever you're seeing is at the zenith. It's going to be worse down there where that thing is.
Definitely. So anyway, we're going to have another go at it, I think. But maybe we'll, this next April, we'll have a go and we'll capture, 10-second exposures and see if we can get some, we'll use subframe selector to select really low FWA.
Or maybe we should just have one person just do a lot of 15-second stars, and that will be our stars, and we'll just, because you take them all out and star exterminator and then add them back in. So
well, there's two things. One, if you're doing RGB for stars, you don't need long exposures for that. Stars are thousands of times brighter than the nebula. So you get yourself a couple of hours of RGB on stars and you're good. You don't need L for that.
no.
But if thinking about what you're talking about there, where you're looking at a low target, that might be one of those arguments. And I didn't talk about this because I wasn't thinking about it, about how seeing affects this. But effectively, when you're got a target that low, your seeing is going to be worse because you've got so much more atmosphere. And that's an argument for doing shorter exposures, because then you can apply some of those lucky imaging techniques as opposed to just smearing out the seeing into this average. You can go find the best ones. So
maybe we should even do the video rather than I don't know, that would be really super short. I still don't really understand how lucky imaging works, but we've got to go that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting idea to try. I hadn't thought about that, but it sort of makes sense in my head. So I would question it because my head at night, don't trust it.
All right. I have a question here. We have a dark sky site, which is approximately Bortle 2, and we're building an observatory and putting in it a RASA, I believe it's a RASA 8-inch telescope, which Bob, are you on? Bob Circus? I don't see him.
He's here.
He is?
He's muted.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
Bob,
I'm here. What's up?
which camera do we have on that?
It's a 183 at the moment.
Okay.
183 MC.
And
Uh,
what's the sensor on
plan
that
is to go. The
camera?
plan is to go to a 2600.
Okay, but what's the sensor on the camera that we're going to be using?
It's a 183 MC Pro.
Okay. So under those conditions, if you've got a very fast telescope and you've got a fast telescope, you've got Bortle 2 skies, and the seeing is normally, I would say, above average. Is that fair?
That seems about right.
Above average, I think that's fair. Do any of your opinions, Linda, change on, for example, because with that, I think we're going to be able to track with that for a very long time. And if the theory is image for as long as you can reasonably track with your mounts.
That's only one half without saturating too many stars. At f2, you're going to saturate stars a lot more quickly. So
Exactly.
that's going to give you your ceiling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's highly dependent on the object. For example, when I tested on Orion, I mean, stars were saturated in 5 seconds. It was
Right. And then you go over in Markarian's chain in Virgo where there aren't a lot of stars, and you could go for a lot longer if you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. So you made a point earlier about gain on flats, and some of us have a discussion about what do you really need for a flat? Because you're just measuring debris in the optical chain, right? So,
And the vignetting of your system. Yeah.
right. So I don't think we care about temperature. And I don't, why would we care about gain?
Because it would change the noise readings, the noise levels in your thing. And so when you're doing the division, you've offset things by a different amount.
Okay.
I think that matters, although I'm not positive.
Yeah, we're just trying to I mean, we're gonna do calibrated frames, but I mean, that's a chore. You want to get them done early, you want to get them done and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I guess flats are a little more challenging on a RASA style scope.
All right. Okay. So, Chris, any final questions, or anybody else final questions for Linda, who's been so kind to spend more than an hour with us?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. No,
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions.
My pleasure. It's fun to geek out with folks who like the same stuff.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions and I don't hear anybody interrupting, thank you so much, Linda. We greatly appreciate you taking time to chat with us. I hope maybe in about a year or so, if we'd like to perhaps invite you back to talk about maybe the processing side, because as we all saw in your PowerPoint program there that you gave, there are some really incredible images that you've produced, and I'm sure everybody would love to hear about that as well. So I'm going to invite you back now to come back, maybe after the first of the year at some point, maybe when it's Galaxy season. And there's not a whole lot for people to do, except for those of us with long focal length. Maybe we can have you back to talk to us about processing.
I'd be happy to, and I'll give you a preview. My process, when I started, my processing was very complex because I was flailing and didn't know what I was doing. And as I've learned since, the best thing for me is keep it simple, stupid, and try not to do too much. And learning to stay within what the data can do has given me better results than me trying to get fancy and extract too much. So that's your preview.
Okay. Well, all right,
Stephen,
everybody.
this is Bill Garver. I have a question. Will Linda's presentation be available online? Because she gave some URLs and so on.
I
Yes.
can send Stephen those URLs.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I wasn't fast enough to get all of them.
Yeah, some of them were uncopyable anyway. So
Thanks.
All right. And yeah, just go ahead and send those to me and I'll relay those to the group. And I will do my best to get this on the AppSig YouTube channel promptly. And because there's a lot of great information here, and I know there's more than a couple people that wanted to be part of it, but I think they're still on vacation. And they'll definitely want to see what Linda or hear what Linda had to say. See and hear. All right. Thank you, Linda. We're going to let you sign off now, and we're going to go to the business part of our meeting where where Bob is going to talk about our Noble Observatory at our dark sky site. Thank you very much. Although you're invited to stick around and listen, I'm sure you've got other things you might be wanting to do.
unfortunately, I would actually love to stay around and listen, but I can't tonight. So, but thank you for the offer. And thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun to chat with you guys.
Thanks,
Our
Linda.
pleasure.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks.
Okay, Bob Circus, you're going to give us information on what's happening at Rising Star with the Noble Observatory, and that you're going to be camping out on my doorstep come Thursday morning to retrieve
Yeah.
equipment that for some reason got sent to me.
Yes. So I'll try and go quickly. The only thing I really want to show is the registration form. So our equipment arrives Thursday at Stephen's house, and between Stephen and myself, we cannot figure it out unless we just can't figure out why it's being delivered to his house. When I noticed that was the delivery point, I called to verify. And since it's coming from Canada through customs, I figure we'll just leave it as it is. Let's just minimize the risk, and I'll go fetch it on Thursday. It means I will, depending on my work schedule, I'll either deliver and stay at Rising Star Friday and Saturday, or I'll come back and then take it out there first thing for Saturday. There will be a work day. We've got a crew coming out, and it's going to be rain or shine. So, but we've got 3 or 4 people coming out to deploy the equipment. And once that's done, we will get it synchronized with the mount, and we will test it. And the way we will test it is we can do it in the daylight. Is we'll pick something that's up in the daytime. We'll slew the mount, slew the telescope to it, which should take the dome with it, and just watch everything track for a while. So that's one thing. That is great news. I, like everybody else, getting pretty agitated with the lack of communications from the Next Dome folks. Basically, with Stephen's assistance, I sent him an email last week that said, hey, our grand opening event is at Cook Children's Hospital on the 27th. It's going to be terribly disappointing if we can't do this for the kids that are there. And, you know, and there will be, it's a big deal. It'd be very disappointing to have to let the Star Telegram know why, if we couldn't do it. Anyway, the email was
I don't think
sent
you
next
said
day.
that.
Pardon?
You didn't say that in the email. At least I don't remember reading an email that said you were going to tell the Star Telegram.
Well, it wasn't in the email, but I found the RB's phone number.
Oh, I think you were thinking about it.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. Hey, Spica. Anyway, be that as it may, the day after they got the email, we got the letter about it being shipped. So that's all to the good. So we hope to be online next week. And uh, so that's really exciting. Last night, Jim and I did a function test of moving data from Rising Star to our network attached devices in my home. And he started his sequence at 9:57, and all of his 234 images arrived in on the NAS device by 7 minutes after his session closed at 5:47. And I had another process as the files were being delivered. They were being thrown into a compressed file, a zip file. And Stephen picked them up, I think, a little bit before lunch, or not Stephen, but Jim picked them up a little bit before lunch. He was disappointed. It was 6.5 gigabyte file, and it took him 26 minutes to download. So I think our process is pretty good. Our next adjustment to that is to try multi-threading to see if we can improve that bandwidth out of Rising Star. In theory, we should be able to move more data even on our narrow bandwidth. So we're going to try and find what that sweet spot is. So I'm feeling pretty good about the collect the data, send the data process. So the next thing is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I sent an email out the other day with how, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I created a Google form. So once all the equipment is there, we will be MVP, minimum viable product. And that means that people can sign up for imaging time on the RASA. And at the moment, we will use a Google form while Peter and I are crash building the website. And I just wanted to walk through it with you really quick. So hold on for a second while I get all of this out of the way. I just need to grab the link. And one moment, please. Okay, I have all kinds of garbage over. Okay, so trying to keep things as simple as possible, but I'm also trying to open the discussion here. So this is the first thing you get. There's 5 pages. It's not truly 5 pages, but it's just the way things work. So there are basically 2 imaging sessions per month. Window A is up until the new moon, and then window B is after the new moon through the waning crescent. The new moon period of the day before, the day of, day after is reserved for our club imaging projects. So, and we'll get into it later. It's in the text that you have to click when you go to submit. So then the next form slide is enter your name, your email address, and your email address has to be the email address that you registered with on Night Sky Network. And that is to assure that people that are registering are authorized or paid up members. And your phone number is required so that during your imaging session, if there are issues, we can contact you. Okay. Questions so far? Right. So the next items are when do you want to image? So you pick a date. This will allow you, and we're going to use this form as we build the website, but you can pick a date in the past. There's nothing we can do about that in Google Forms. So if your date is in the past, when people go to review it, we'll send you an email saying your date's bad. So you can pick a date. So I'll just pick September the 3rd. When do you want to start your imaging time? So there are 2 times to pick. There's nautical sunset or midnight. And please be cognizant about your start time. If your target is not going to be available, reasonably close to nautical, if you pick nautical sunset, you should be able to start your imaging session shortly thereafter. Okay, it's a courtesy thing. So you pick that, and then of course your session length, which is 4 hours. If your image is only available for a short time, pick a shorter period. And I'll just pick nautical sunrise. Then next. So here, in order for us to import or to create your target, you need to go to Telescopius. And how many people are not familiar with Telescopius? Perfect. So you'll need to go to Telescopius.
So let's predict there are people who are not familiar with Telescopius who might be watching the video later.
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, then we'll have to give you a session on how to use
Okay.
Telescopius. It's a way to frame. And I'm trying to keep my talking short.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, so you give your name, your object name, say like M31 Andromeda. I don't know if I spelled it right. And so we do have links to Telescopius here. And you'll have to, set your focal length and the camera information in there and then frame. And at the moment, the position angle of the camera is at 268.57. That might change after this weekend because we've got to tear some things down to finish the work and then put it all together. Then after you'll create your framing information from Telescopius and you'll upload it. And so I'm just going to browse. And so that's that. And the name may not make sense, but there we go. So it's loaded. It gets loaded into an Excel spreadsheet, actually. And then you can pick your exposure time, 60 seconds, pick your binning, that, and your gain. And this is a 183. So you have a choice of 0 or the unity gain on the 183 is 111. Okay. When we start the session, we'll figure out what the temperature is outside, and then we'll set the sensor temperature. Most likely it will be 0. Okay, so you click next, and then I know this isn't pretty, but I don't know how to make it any prettier. What happens? Yeah. So when you submit, you're agreeing to that, that FWAS holds the intellectual property rights to images taken during the session. When publishing publicly, you have to credit this. Now, these are just my initial thoughts. To have something there, it's meant to generate conversation. The legal beagles haven't read or approved it yet, but it's just kind of a starting point. And as always, building this, it's going to lead to a lot of conversation. So, or it should. And then the new moon period, the evening before, on, and after the new moon is reserved for club approved projects. I think we should have 3 a month. And so this is where it gets tricky. The intent here is you can book 2 sessions per imaging window. So that means, if I go to register for a session, I can book a Monday or Tuesday in an imaging window, or a Monday or a Sunday and a Thursday. That's the intent there. And then if you look and there's nothing scheduled on Thursday, and you're there, you can book time on that Wednesday, even if you've already booked your 2 sessions. The idea is to use the equipment as much as possible. If there is no time scheduled, we'll be imaging club projects. Scheduling conflicts, go to the first valid request submitted. So what that is saying is if 2 or more people enter a request for the same time, for the same date and the same time, the first one who entered the request gets the slot. We have timestamps on when the request was made. Outreach events take priority over individual sessions. So if you have a session on the 27th of September and we have an event like Cook Children's that is going to bounce you from at least the front end of that. And then all scheduling decisions made by the advisory committee are final. So that's what that's all about. We're a bunch of reasonable people. I don't anticipate a whole bunch of craziness, to be honest with you, but I just wanted to get discussion started. Is there anything here that strikes people as unfair, unreasonable, or need to strike? Okay, I take that as a very positive yes. Richard Hoffman, are you still here, big guy?
Yes.
You did a test for us, right?
Yes, I did.
And what were your thoughts?
It worked pretty well. I'm fairly new to Telescopius myself, but I went through it and figured out how to create the right file. So I actually had a M31 session created in Telescopius, and I imported that into that one screen. And I also tried to skip things that had to be required, and it wouldn't let me skip. So overall, the forms function pretty well.
Okay, awesome. And by the way, it's weird, but it's to create that file, you do it in their Mosaic subpanel. So if you want to do a Mosaic, no problem, you can do a Mosaic. So if you think about it, a single panel, a non-Mosaic is a 1-panel Mosaic. So mosaics are quite easily accomplished. And that's all I had for today. And I'm trying. Any questions about anything? Fire away.
Bob, this is Chris. I quite often image 2 or even 3, sometimes even 4 different targets. in a night, mainly because they're not available all night, and they might only be available, or I might only decide, hey, I want to capture it when it's above 35 degrees. So I look at stellarium, and I'll figure out, okay, I want 9 till 11, I want on this target, and then 11 till 2 on that target, and then 2 till 5 on this target, right? How would the form allow me to do that?
This is MVP. It doesn't, not right now. So the next step we'll be able to do that.
Okay.
But right now, we can't. And if you here, okay, there's a caveat there. If you can create a proper telescopius file with multiple panels that happen to be different objects, then we'll be able to do that. That won't be a problem. But if the data that comes in, that CSV file is nonsensical, then we're not. Basically, it's a manual process. There are going to be 2 or 3 guys putting it all, loading their target data. And if it's nonsensical, we're not going to mess around. We're just going to say, sorry, data is not good. But if you want to do that, and it seems to make sense to me, I don't think it'd be too challenging to do that. So you create as you mentioned, Chris, you create 3 telescopius files, and then
Right.
you just merge, your rows into.
Well, you could submit the Google form 3 times, one for each target.
Well, the problem is, no, you can't. You get one shot. I think it's going to be too challenging. It's going to be too challenging for us to do multiple images in the same session unless it's a mosaic at the present time.
Yeah.
We've got to be able to build some smarts in the website to do that. Using the Google form, it's just probably not going to work.
Right.
So I'm not.
So really,
I mean,
really, Bob, what you're trying to achieve here is just MVP.
exactly. Yeah. Once this is going with the Google form, as mentioned, Peter and I are going to be tearing into building a website. And I think the first thing we want to build out is being able to build a request that has different objects that will pass through. So I just don't know. And Chris, the other thing too is if you have multiple objects, you would need exposure time, bin, gain for each one.
So then why not submit the Google form multiple times, one for each object, and then you can select the parameters that you want.
Because you're getting out of scope of MVP.
Right, but then you're going to end up with a lot of wasted time, i.e. time when the scope could be used and it's not being used. Because a lot of targets, unless you've got something that never sets, you're looking north. But if you're looking south, then it's going to set. The Earth's going to rotate it out of the field of view. So,
okay, so let me ask the question in a different way. What's more important, getting it available soon or building this form and waiting a month?
well, I don't see that as they're not mutually exclusive. Because you've already built the form, you could just allow people to submit it twice. One for an image in the evening.
How do we know
which one in the morning?
How do we know which one you want to go first?
Because it will select different time. You put the You put time in the forms.
Would it be better if we had smaller time windows instead of 4 hours? What if we had 2 hour time windows or 1 hour time windows?
Well, even with the Raza though, 2 hours,
It's going to be a lot.
But you're also thinking about if you're going to divide the night up like that, somebody has to manually program the system in our current state.
No, it gets.
I'm with Robert. I think we leave it simple as a target per window until we get past the testing phase.
yeah, this is the beta program. We might just want to keep it simple for now, Chris, and then after we get some experience in doing this for a couple of months, then we can say, all right, hey, here's a way that we could actually accomplish that objective.
Sure, that's okay. I was
So,
just asking.
but
Yeah, and
I think it
don't
makes
anticipate.
sense, and we'll get there, but we
Yeah.
need to start somewhere, right?
Sure.
So, and I don't know. I mean, I like what you're trying to do, Chris, and I agree with it. Uh, you know, it's also a question of do we focus on the Google form or the website?
Well,
They are kind of,
eventually
they
we're
are
going
kind
to
of
eventually we'll have a website with a user interface, so maybe
right,
that.
but our goal is to build the user interface for requesting time,
Yeah.
which is this Google form, and that's what we want to do first. So when we're building the interface for that, we'll incorporate these other features. Does that seem reasonable?
After you get through talking about this, I just want to
Yeah,
give
but
some
I see your
information.
hand. I know you're chopping at the
Yeah.
bit.
Well, I just
Go
got some
ahead.
information about the part of the other project. So
All
Yeah,
right.
go ahead.
My fantasy football league is about to start drafting, guys. How much more time do we plan on chatting?
Well, let's just hear Glenn's comment or question here.
well, I was just going to say, uh, Robert, don't spend too much time making Home Assistant work. I have progressed past Home Assistant today, and I'm running tonight with all my Nina data being populated to a database that could be pulled by any website and displayed.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I got tired. Why go through the MQTT to
Yes.
Home Assistant and then trying to figure a way to make Home Assistant available to our website?
Okay.
Just I'm using the InfluxDB exporter plugin for Nina now that
Oh,
publishes
yeah,
everything.
that
Yep.
finally just got stabilized.
Yep. So
Okay.
I'm running it now. I had to upgrade my Starfront Nina to the beta, but it is on release candidate 7 now. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
trust it
pretty
for a night.
stable.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna trust it and see what happens, but it's already reporting right now, even without imaging going on. I'm getting all the metrics from Nina, including voltage and everything out of my power box. So it looks like a
Awesome.
much better way to go about it.
Hey, we love it. Keeping it simple is the best way to go.
Yep. Now somebody else will have to figure out how to read the database and put it on a website because I'm not
That's easy.
doing that.
That's super easy.
Okay, cool.
Appreciate
That's
it.
all I had.
Okay, awesome. That's all I had, Stephen. I was trying very hard to keep it to 12 minutes and I failed. So I am done. I'm complete.
I think Steven's picking draft picks.
He's on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to insert my 2 draft picks, so my apologies. All right, well, hey, thanks everybody. Great meeting. I will try to get this online as soon as possible, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
All
Thanks,
right, guys.
everybody.
Cheers, Walt. See you later.
Good to
Thanks,
see everybody
everybody.
again.
Look
Yeah,
forward to
guys.
sending out the email Sunday night.
Thank you, everybody.
Clear
All right.
skies.
See ya.
Bye.